بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت عليم حكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, in these episodes of Saving Our Souls, we have been discussing what exactly is the share of the heart in worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the obligations of the heart in worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have reached the discussion of ittiham al-nafs, right? Accusing the self. Right? Last week we discussed about patience and gratitude, and that these are obligations of the heart, and that these are things that we should strive to cultivate in our heart, right? But in trying to do so, the nafs, that lower self, that lower part of the human being, which inclines toward disobedience, which inclines toward indulgence, which inclines toward its appetites and lusts, right? And an extension of that, the ego, which inclines toward praise of people, right? Love of status, and so forth, right? That and one necessary quality in order to be able to strive properly in cultivating these other meanings that we've been talking about is ittiham al-nafs, right? To accuse the self, right? And this is a praiseworthy quality, right? Self-accusation is a praiseworthy quality, because the opposite of which is, right, is self-conceit, right? To deem one's own self, right, blameless, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He swears in the Quran, right? وَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ, that He swears by the accusative self, the accusative soul. That soul, that when wrong is done, you question yourself. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Right? That accusation and that blame is praiseworthy, right? And that is a praiseworthy status, right? And this goes back to what the Prophet ﷺ, he said, right? إذا سرتك حسنتك وساءتك سيئتك فأنت مؤمن. That when your good deeds please you and your bad deeds, right, make you feel bad, right, then you are a true believer, right? Because that feeling of remorse, right, which a person experiences after doing a sin, or after doing something that's not befitting to them, doing something that they know was wrong, right? That is the first step in order to diagnose and to treat these different ailments, right? But if a person, right, does not feel that they've done anything wrong, then how could they ever fix it, right? So اتهام النفس فيما تأمره به خشية أن تكون تخادع للتوصل إلى محرم, right? So this accusing the self is in multiple things. It could be in retrospect, right? That why did I do that? Why did I allow myself to do that? Right? That's, right, accusing oneself about what happened in the past, right? But, right, what we're talking about specifically, even though those other meanings are important, right, specifically is that when the self has its desires and it has its indulgences and has its appetites, and it tries to command the intellect to get what it wants. Do it, do it, do it. Those whispers and those insinuations of the self, right? Coupled with the whispers and insinuations of the shaitan, right? So our role in that is to have, right, to be skeptical of the nafs at all times. So if the nafs wants something, right, if the nafs gives a thought or an idea, and we'll talk about how to distinguish between thoughts. How do we know if it's from the nafs, right? But if that nafs gives that idea and it gives that thought, right, then automatically be skeptical. Why are you trying to deceive me? Are you trying to use this as a bridge for me to now to do this one thing, which will eventually lead to another, which will eventually lead to something haram, right? So to accuse the nafs, right, of this deceptive undertone in everything that it commands, right? Now, when it comes to thoughts, khawatir, right, that these thoughts that come to our mind, right, it's really important that we understand where these thoughts are from, right? If we can tell the source of these thoughts, then we can react accordingly, right? So if the thought is something that is bad, right, against the Sharia, or even something that has to do with physical pleasure as opposed to spiritual pleasure, right? It's a physical benefit as opposed to a spiritual benefit, right? Then it is either from shaitan or from the nafs, which we're talking about now, right? And now how do we distinguish, right, a bad thought of whether it comes from shaitan or whether it comes from the nafs? So if it comes from shaitan, right, shaitan's only goal is to get a person to deviate, and that does not have to be all at once, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, right, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ, and do not follow the footsteps of shaitan, meaning he takes people step by step by step, right? So so the shaitan, when he does these insinuations, right, or these whispers, and he puts these thoughts into people's minds, what he's doing is trying to get them to deviate however he can. So, for instance, shaitan says, "Oh, look at that thing, right? You know that it's haram, right? Right? So you say no. Right? You refuse to do it because you know that it's a bad thing. So it's either from shaitan or from the nafs, right? So you say no, and then he says, "Okay, then listen to this thing that's haram." And you say no, and then okay, then do this. So it'll always give alternatives. That shaitan always gives alternatives because his only goal is to deceive however he can. Whatever he can do, he wants to do it, right? Whereas the nafs, whatever it wants, right? It's pegged on that one thing that it wants, and it does not give alternatives, right? One of our blessed teachers, Habib Ali Abu Bakr bin Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Salam, he gives the example, which is a very kind, polite example, right, out of all the possible things that the nafs could want. Right? He says that, for instance, if the nafs wants strawberry ice cream, right, and you go to the store and you look in the freezer, right, and they have all kinds of ice cream, but not your flavor, strawberry, right? They don't have strawberry ice cream. Right? So if it was a thought from shaitan, shaitan would just say, get any ice cream, right? As long as you get the ice cream, right? Whereas the nafs, whatever it wants, it wants. So instead of saying, oh, get this, get vanilla instead, or get lemon instead, it'll say, go to a different store, find this strawberry ice cream. And that is just a very polite example from him, hafidhahullah wa ra'ahu. Right? So if it is a commandment or an insinuation or a plea towards something bad or something haram or disliked or dubious or even something that is of no benefits in the next life, then it's either from the nafs or it's from the shaitan. If it's from shaitan, you'll find that once you refuse that, an alternative thoughts will come. Right? If it's from the nafs, right, it'll press and push on that one thing, and it's much more difficult to avert that thought than it is if it comes from shaitan. Right? If the thought is good, then the thought is either directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or it is from the angels. And the same distinguishment can be made that if it is from the angels, that the angel's goal is to get you to do any good, however it may be, right? So the thought might come to the mind, oh, I should help this person, right? And then the opportunity goes away, and then all of a sudden that thought changes. Oh, you should give charity to this person, right? Something new comes up. Whereas if it is a thought directly inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will be on a specific thing, and it will be pressing, and it will be continuous on that same thing and relentless. Right? And those thoughts should be acted upon. Those thoughts should be acted upon. Right? So when it comes to the nafs, to always be reluctant to follow, to always be skeptical of why the nafs wants what it wants, because in essence, the nafs is the most deceiving faculty of the human being, not the shaitan. Right? The nafs is the most deceiving faculty of the human being. Right? As the Prophet ﷺ said, right, the worst of your enemies is the nafs that is within your two sides. Right? Which links us to the next quality, which is to not ever be content with the nafs. Right? Right? And how do we not be content with the nafs? Right? The nafs, right? We have to constantly reflect on our own deficiencies. Right? Because we mentioned already that one of the most fervent aspects of the nafs is ego, right? You have the side of appetites and indulgences, and right, and enjoying the pleasures and lusts, right? But the other side, the ego, is much more, right, dangerous, right? Because the ego can get what it wants even through religious actions, right? Whereas the lusts and these things are generally not done through religious means. Right? But ego can be done, can be achieved or inflated even by religious actions, right? Somebody says, "Oh, he's pious." Oh, right. So then, when a person prays salah in public, the ego is there fighting for its portion of praise, right? So to never be content with one's own self, right? One's own nafs, right? And we mentioned that that we as humans, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored us, are honored because of our soul, not because of our nafs. Right? We are honored because of our soul and because of our intellect, and our intellect's ability to choose that which is permanently better for that which, and sacrifice that which is temporarily enjoyable for that which is permanently better, meaning in the next life. Right? So it is not that nafs is not really, right? That us not being content with the nafs is not like a low self-esteem. That's not what we're talking about, right? But to understand and to be, right, and to be realistic that we do have this part of us that is trying to bring us down, and to be really aware of that fact that I have deficiencies, I have this nafs pulling me down, and the more that we are never content with the state of our nafs, right? They were never content with the fact that that faculty can always, right, slip in and try to ruin my deeds, or slip in and trying to ruin my intentions, and so forth, right? Then we will slowly, right, we will be able to defend ourselves from the nafs, put the nafs in check, refine the nafs, purify the nafs, until the nafs, right, submits. And then the soul can flourish for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that starts with one not being content with oneself, not trying to justify one's actions, not trying to make excuses for oneself. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Qiyamah, right? بل الإنسان على نفسه بصيرة ولو ألقى معاذيره. Rather, the human is well aware of their own nafs, of their own self, right? Even if they give all kinds of excuses, right? ولو ألقى معاذيره, right? Even if they give all kinds of excuses, right? So one, two, be skeptical, accusative, right, and blaming of the self, right, in anything that it wants, anything that it seeks. Why do you seek that, right? But right, there needs to be a bit of diplomacy with the nafs. To go on an all-out war against the nafs, right, it tends to be very difficult, right, and it's very hard, right? So many scholars would do is that the permissible things that the nafs wants, right, when it comes to the impermissible things that the nafs wants, then no, we just say no, right? There's no bending, there's no, right, but those things which the nafs wants that are not impermissible, like a certain type of food or a certain extra bite of this, right? Or some leisure time, that's right. But so one should have some diplomacy and strive toward discipline in a wise way. So as many scholars, what they would do is they would attach things that they enjoy that their nafs enjoys to acts of worship. So one of the early Muslims, great scholar, right, he used to love dates. He had an absolute obsession with dates, and this is from the nafs, right? It's from the nafs to have to go to any extreme in anything, right? Except for love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So what he would do is that he made a deal with his nafs. He said, "Oh nafs, you can eat as many dates as you want, but for every date that you eat, we have to pray 2 rakats, two units of prayer." And he would do that, and he would eat however many dates he wanted. Right? But then if he ate 10 dates, he would pray 20 rakats. If he ate 20 dates, he would pray 40 rakats, and so forth, right? To train the nafs that not everything is free, right? That you have to earn what you want. So that's a type of diplomacy, right? So that's in regards to the nafs, and we mentioned that the two opposing factors that are trying to draw us down are the nafs and shaitan, right? The nafs being more dangerous than the shaitan, right? So the next would be that bughd shaitan, right? To have an enmity right, and a type of hatred for the shaitan, right? To not be pleased with the shaitan and to not be friendly with the shaitan, right? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that inna shaitana lakum aduwwun fattakhidhuhu aduwwa, that shaitan is your enemy. So take him and treat him as an enemy, right? That to treat him as an enemy, right? And this is and if one really has this perception in their mind that the shaitan is my enemy, he is the one who wants me to go to hell, right? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَدْعُو حِزْبَهُ لِيَكُونُوا مِنْ أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. He only calls his faction, his people, right? So that he only invites them so that they can become the people of the blazing fire. Right, that's his only goal. He's going to hell, and he's trying to take everyone he can with him. Right. So by really reflecting on that and bringing this enmity, right, having this state of enmity toward him in our hearts, right, one will not incline toward following his disobedience, right, following him in disobedience. Right. So the third of our enemies, you can say, right? Because our enemies in Islam are first and foremost our own lower self, our ego, right? Second is the shaitan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that he is our enemy, so treat him as an enemy. He is enmity to us, whether or not we are to him or not, right? So we should treat him in kind, right? And the third is the dunya, and the dunya, to clarify exactly what it means, right, is the distracting nature of this world. It is that part, those aspects of this worldly life which distract us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It does not mean everything in this world, like the sun and the moon and the sunsets, right, and the trees and the beautiful things of this world. That is not the dunya. The dunya is that the worldly aspect, the secular part of this world, which is bereft of any remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or any reflection on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or anything that would lead to such a state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So to dislike and to abhor worldliness, to abhor things that are devoid of any relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it's slight. Like for instance, a sunset, right, shows us the beauty of Allah's creation, right? A piece of, right, a tapestry shows us, right, the beauty that Allah has manifested into the world, right? But worldliness, right? Excessive wealth, excessive adult indulgence, right? Things that are distracting by nature, right? To have a dislike for these things, right? So that the heart does not incline toward those things, thus becoming distracted from the mercy of Allah, from the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And even though there are things in of the world of worldliness that looking at them is not impermissible, right? Right? To look at an excessively expensive car is not impermissible, right? But to look at it with the eye of grandeur and reverence, and to give love that thing, right, takes a place in the heart that if it hadn't been for that place could be filled with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because the love of worldliness and the love of Allah cannot combine in the same heart. And the Prophet he said that love of worldliness is the head of all sins, right? That because the essence of heedlessness is to incline toward anything that distracts or does not induce a state of remembrance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, so these are the three very important topics that we've discussed today, right? The nafs, that lower self, the ego, right? The shaitan, our enemy, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, who only wants us to go to the hellfire, right? And the dunya, which is the tool by which shaitan, right, attracts our nafs, attracts our those appetites and those lusts of our lower self, right? And by means of it, people seek to inflate their ego by nice cars and big houses, right? Which means nothing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll close with the hadith. The Prophet said that if the dunya, this worldliness, were to be in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equivalent to the weight of the wing of a mosquito, then He would not have given anybody who rejects Him even a drink of water, right? The dunya is not worth anything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So we need to remove that from our heart. We need to remove that from our heart, right? And next class we will talk about, right, one more thing that we need to remove from our heart, and then ultimately, then after that, we will talk about the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is what the heart is for. وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.